it is my great delight to invite our first speaker. Fiona Flintan is an ILRI senior scientist, and she has deep experience in rangelands, particularly in Africa, and she's also a global advocate for these systems. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Fiona, and thank you so much.
It's a very broad introduction because the rest of the meeting will go into much of the details. And I'm drawing very much from some work we did last year, which was producing a rangeland atlas that basically brought together big data sets that already exist and just allowed us to kind of start working with a big picture of rangelands and some of the trends, etc., that are happening in rangelands, with the caveat that this is big data and it draws from data sets that already exist. The data hasn't been verified on the ground, but at least it gives us something to start with in the big data gap that we know exists around rangelands. So I'll just briefly cover three things. Firstly, looking at particularly rangelands in Africa, looking at the trends, challenges and threats, and then also the opportunities, which I think will form the basis for the discussion going forward. So across the world, globally, rangelands are a valuable asset, and particularly in Africa. Broadly speaking, using WWF's eco-zoning, rangelands cover 54% of the terrestrial surface of the world, and in Africa, a much higher percentage of 86%. So even as a starting point, rangelands are clearly an important asset and focus, and should be an important focus for Africa and land use in Africa. Across the world and across the rangelands, we see diverse ruminant systems. I mean, this is FAO's work with ILRI from 2018, showing the distribution of different ruminant production systems, providing a whole range of benefits from meat and milk to fuel, income, social, cultural benefits, etc. And as you can see, particularly in Africa, where we've got most of the land covered by rangelands, the livestock production, ruminant production system is highly important. Rangelands are essential for food and nutrition through those ruminant production systems. Most food in the lower middle income countries comes from meat and plants grown on the range, produced on small mixed crop and livestock farms and on rangelands. Most red meat in Kenya, most red meat in developing countries is coming from rangelands, and for example, 90% of red meat in Kenya comes from the rangelands there. Milk and meat have essential roles in nutrition, especially for the world's vulnerable populations. Let's now talk a little bit more about the rangelands and livestock in Africa. Rangelands in Africa cover 30 million square kilometers, 81% of which is used for ruminant livestock production. 13 million or 13 million square kilometers, or 44% of that rangeland area, is classified as arid and too dry, too dry for crops. Grasslands make up 37% of Africa's rangelands, from the large North Sahel semi-desert scrub and grassland, covering 3 million kilometers square, to the smallest, rarest African Madagascan montane grassland and shrub with only 1,280 kilometers square. Rangelands and the people who live on rangelands, work from rangelands, offer two major opportunities, yielding many co-benefits. that being food production and environmental stewardship. If we look at environmental benefits, rangelands in Africa, there are around 7,500 protected areas covering over 3 million square kilometers of Africa's rangelands, with 1,940 key biodiversity areas covering 2 million square kilometers. So that's the map on the left. So much of Africa's rangelands provide this very important service of protected areas. But then much of the wildlife and much of the biodiversity is found outside the protected areas, and across the continent, African rangelands harbour threatened species. The map in red there is a map of endangered vertebrate species produced by IUCN. But we are facing this environmental challenge that ruminant systems, production systems, do emit greenhouse gas emissions, and it's something that we can't ignore. However, there needs to be a more nuanced and balanced debate and discussion on these issues. When the debate is normally taken forward and related to land use, there's a failure to take into account the multifunctionality of rangelands and, for example, pastoral production systems. As we know, rangelands and the land where pastoral and livestock production takes place, particularly in Africa, that land is also used for many other functions, whether it's for tourism, for collection of non-timber forest products, or other. And increasingly, we're seeing the attention given to offsetting emissions in rangelands through carbon sequestration. If we look at water is a major input into the livestock production system, but in the rangelands, it's mainly what can be called green water that's used, rainfall, and it's not water that would otherwise be used for consumption. Rangeland health is increasingly being seen as a very important part of One Health, and part of that nexus between human health, environmental health, and animal health. Grazing systems designed and managed with pastoralists or ranchers minimize threats to livestock, human, and environmental health while restoring rangelands to their productive potential. However, we are seeing trends and threats to rangelands. These are some of the maps that we included in our rangeland atlas. One of them was to draw on the information from the Land Degradation Neutrality database and map this to rangelands. Overall, the picture given by the Land Degradation Neutrality data isn't too bad. It shows that though there is degradation happening in rangelands according to the indicators that they use, there is a large amount that is stable, but also a great amount that shows improvements. Of course, these are big data figures, but from an overall trend, it suggests that the degradation isn't necessarily as broad as the big figures that are often used in relation to rangelands. But of course, this hides local changes, local situations, local contexts. This was a map that we produced drawing in information on projections of climate change and climate change thresholds to 2050. What it does show is that the majority of rangelands will see some climate change impact. The three different impacts that are shown here is a loss of length of growing period, average annual temperature change, and an increase in the average maximum temperature. And we can see that in much of Africa, the dark red is showing that there would be an increase in average maximum temperature over much of Africa's rangelands. So this is going to be one of the more problematic issues that can be seen. I understand, I'm not an expert in this, but I understand that the length of growing period can actually be, the changes in the length of growing period can actually be more of an advantage to grasslands than the other climatic changes that might be seen. But the temperature for sure is one thing that is going to cause a problem for grasslands and the livestock that are dependent on them. This is a new map that we've produced more recently and is not actually part of the atlas yet. This highlights that rangelands are increasingly being seen for large-scale agriculture. This is land taken from the ILC land matrix, and which maps the large-scale investments. We haven't really dug deeper into this data, but it just gives an overall picture that rangelands are seen as a place for large-scale investment, and often with serious environmental and social impacts if the safeguards or the proper land use making decisions are not a basis for these. So it's something that needs to be borne in mind here. Having said that, there are lots of opportunities for rangelands and for investing in rangelands, and we'll hear more about these through the session. But just to touch on a few here. Related to the issue of land use, land deals, etc., strengthening rangelands tenure security, governance and management really is one of the foundations for improving the productivity of rangelands and for increasing restoration opportunities, for example. As many of us know, rangelands and pastoral systems, pastoral lands tend to have very weak tenure security, partly because of their complexity. Governments find it very hard to develop land tenure systems that encompass all the complexity that exists in pastoral tenure, but also for other reasons. I mean, it leaves the land open and easily accessible for land use change, for land investment, etc. Management of rangelands, of course, is based on traditional customary systems and has been successful. However, with the new challenges that are facing pastoral systems, there is a need to perhaps reconsider some of this management or strengthen weakened management systems that exist. And processes such as one that ILRI has been very strongly developing, participatory rangeland management, is an option. And then we'll be hearing more about other approaches, processes such as holistic rangeland management later in the session.
Fiona, we're going to have to draw it to a close, so if you please.
Sure. More trees in the right places. You'll be hearing more about this from Frida. And payments for ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration. It's very complicated, as this diagram shows, and it's not as easy as is being portrayed, and particularly ensuring that measurements are robust enough to be sustainable. They might be robust enough to enter the carbon market, but really we need to take care to ensure that the right monitoring and evaluation and methods are being used to support evidence of changes in carbon and back up those carbon credits. Something that is increasingly getting attention is the development of standards for products coming from Rangelands. This is from the Sustainable Fibre Alliance. And there is also underway a process to develop a Rangelands standard as well for Rangelands products. And then finally, rangeland restoration through sustainable value chains. We know that rangeland restoration is needed, but how can we harness finance from livestock value chains, from livestock value chain actors for that? Those that are benefiting from such value chains, such as the cashmere production, how can we get those benefiting and making profit from these value chains to then invest back into the rangeland restoration, into the resource base? And this is the topic of a project that we are developing with IUCN, hopefully with GEF funding to start next year. Final slide, data. We all need data, and we still have plans to develop a global rangelands data platform that all of us can contribute to and benefit from. So
fantastic.
The end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Fiona, and thank you for putting together this great summary, both in terms of why they're so important, what are the challenges, but what are the clear opportunities. And so greatly appreciate your leaving these key messages up as we start to bring this presentation to a close. We do want to thank you very much, and thank you also for your direct points to the other speakers on our program. So very grateful.